My name is Mary Novak, and I have the pleasure of currently serving as the chair of the advisory board of the Initiative of Restorative Justice and Healing here at the University of St. Thomas Law School. I'm also the founding chair of the board of the Catholic Mobilizing Network. It is so good to have both of these organizations coming together to gather us these 3 days. This afternoon, I have the absolute honor of introducing this session, Clergy, Sexual Abuse and Healing, which is generously sponsored by the Archdiocese of St. Paul in Minneapolis. Thank you so much. As those of us who have been working on this issue for years, addressing the extensive harm from clergy sexual abuse and its cover-up is a work in progress, to say the least. This survivor-led conversation is critical for us to hear what still lies ahead for healing. The Catholic Mobilizing Network and the Initiative on Restorative Justice and Healing both recognize the critical importance of listening to survivors of sexual abuse. And we are honored to have with us today two survivors who will grace us with their courageous and authentic sharing. First, Juan Carlos Cruz. Many of you know him and his story because he's been a courageous storyteller. And he has become a significant formator for our Pope, Pope Francis, on so many levels. And I could not be more grateful to have known him over these years and for him to be with us today. We are also going to have this panel moderated by Mike Hoffman, who chairs the Hope and Healing Committee, which is a group of clergy abuse survivors, priests, and staff in the Archdiocese of Chicago who reach out to other survivors seeking help to heal from the pain. Courageous work, Mike. Thank you for moderating us today. We also have two individuals who have intentionally centered victim survivors in their life and work. First, Regina Boyd, an experienced mental health counselor and marriage and family therapist. And she brings that experience of accompanying victim survivors of sexual abuse to this conversation from a trauma-informed lens. Thank you for flying from Florida to join us today, Regina. And Barbara Thorpe, social worker extraordinaire, who in 2002 was asked in the wake of the Spotlight series from the Boston Globe, was invited to stand up the organization in the Archdiocese of Boston to address clergy abuse. And really, her work has centered on accompanying survivors and their families for decades. And finally, Archbishop Hebda. From this archdiocese, he and his superb team continue to guide this archdiocese on the journey towards healing. And that's on the heels of the criminal charges, the bankruptcy, the removal of the prior bishop. Archbishop Hebda also centers victim survivors in his work and in all that has come in the subsequent years. So as we enter more deeply into this space, this sacred space, let us take a moment of silence to ground ourselves, to receive the offerings that are going to be coming our way in the next hour and a half. Before we begin this important conversation, let me remind us all that in the spirit of care, we are committed to creating a conference that is as trauma-informed as possible. Restorative justice is about the work of repairing and healing from harm, which necessarily means naming harms. In this plenary, we will hear mention of clergy sexual abuse and possibly more. If strong emotions arise, we ask you to please be attentive to your body and to its needs. Feel free to get up and move around, get something to drink, step away if you need to step away. Consider a person outside of this conference who you may need to reach out to for support. On the second floor, at the end of the hallway, there is a small, beautiful reflective room. It's available if you need it. And in that room, you will find instructions if you need to contact someone for pastoral support. So with that, it is my absolute pleasure to invite Juan Carlos to begin our time together.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. I really appreciate it. I want to thank everybody who invited me, Chrisanne, Father Dan, everybody. It'd be too long to mention. You're doing such great work, and it's such an honor to be invited with people that are incredible from all over the U.S., and so thank you. And thank you, Archbishop, for facilitating that these things happen. You know, I've heard about your work, and I want to thank you, because it's very thankless sometimes, because survivors can be all over the spectrum, and but putting yourself out there and putting your team and putting everybody out there to help survivors really means a lot. And some may not notice it now, they will later, or maybe never, but at least you're doing the right thing. And I thank you, because I wish many, many more were doing what you're doing. So thank you, Archbishop. So they asked me to do what's called an exhortation. I didn't even know what the word meant, but because I felt, is this a synod? What? So finally they explained that it's just tell them your story, and then it'll set, the tone for the rest of the conversation, which I'm happy to do. I also, Father Dan told me that I could say this. I talked about Francis on Monday, and he knew that I was coming here, and I told him what it was and what I was doing. And he said to tell you, thank you for doing what you're doing, and that he sends his blessing. So he's very knowledgeable of what's happening here today. So thank you for that. Well, thank him, really. They tell me, oh, you've done this so many times and you do this all the time, and but I still get really nervous when I have to talk, because it's not, I went to the mall yesterday and I bought this, and it really impacts your life. It's a very uncomfortable truth that hangs in you, around you. So it's hard to tell you the story. I normally don't even have notes. I mean, I have some, but I try to see what I guess the Spirit tells me or guides me to tell you. I was so impressed with the panel earlier, Monique and Sam and everybody else. I mean, so academic. I'm not very academic, so. But it was amazing, because all those things that you're talking about are so relevant to survivors in a world where in certain sectors of the church, life is an one-issue thing. Well, life is not a one-issue thing. The life of survivors matters, the life of immigrants, the life of all the people we were talking today, the life of everyone matters. Life is not a one-issue situation. So it's really important to understand. My story, everybody knows it. People go to Google and don't believe everything you read in Google, especially my age. But because I've lied a lot. And so even to the New York Times. I was just a normal kid from a normal Catholic family who wanted to be a priest at 8 years old and, gave communion to my teddy bears and my figure, I put them all and celebrated whatever I thought was Mass and, so I was just a normal, wasn't a saint and just a normal kid. But my dad died in one of those very formative years. I was only 14, 15 when my dad died. I'm the oldest of three. And my dad was 39 and my mom was 37. We were a very close family. We still are. And so I was devastated. I didn't know why God, who we loved and we said we loved so much, and why he was doing this to us. So they told me, oh, no, you have to go see Father Karadima, who is a saint, and he loves all the young people. And so I went. First thing, when he decided to speak, because he was a saint, so considered a saint, so you had to wait your turn. So when the Spirit, as he said, told him, he talked to me and he said, look, I'll be your spiritual director and you have to be very happy because God has given you a new father here on earth. And you tell me you want to be a priest. Don't tell anybody, but you have to be obedient and humble. So if I say things are black, you have to believe it's black, even though if you see it white, because God is talking through me. Impressionable kid, vulnerable. I thought, okay, this is what God wants. And shortly after, the abuse started in confession, and I'm not going to go into details because you can only imagine, you've heard stories. But it really destroyed my life and at that time. And to this day, even though I know that it's not my fault and it's never the survivor's fault, it's difficult to think I'm an executive for a global company. I've studied. I consider myself mildly intelligent. And why at 15 I didn't run away and leave? And why didn't I do that? And as you meet survivors, and maybe some of you are here, you'll realize that we all have that question that haunts us all the time. And, I don't know how to answer it, because for everybody I meet, I feel there's a different answer and there's a different way of solving it. And I'll get to Pope Francis in a second, but I feel that it is so important for everybody who meets survivors to understand that you are going to meet survivors that are very angry and upset, and rightly so, because, that really impacts your life. And others that are more, resolved or more, but that always follows you. And it is important to, one of the things that I've wanted to do, speaking out and talking about this, and first of all, because I want you to ask any questions, even if it's not politically correct, from a survivor, because I think I can answer, at least from my perspective, and maybe it helps you deal with other survivors that you have to encounter in your life, and maybe, not categorize them as the angry survivor, the one who wants money, the one that, because nobody wants that. Nobody is responsible for the feelings that a survivor feels. It was very horrible to me when, in a country that was 94% Catholic, to come out for the first time and speak about abuse of a priest that was considered a saint. And Chile doesn't have many saints, but it's it was terrible, and the insults, and unfortunately those people who paid for the lawyers, for priests, are having their children abused now. There's a case in Chile right now of a family that was the biggest supporter of priests that had abused me and others, that paid for their lawyers, and now their child was abused by the legionaries. So by so it's a reality that happens everywhere, and not only in the church, by the way, obviously in families. For me, it's been really important to be able to speak out as a survivor and tell my story, understanding that so many others can't, that so many others are wandering around the world seeking and begging for justice. A survivor, anybody, frankly, especially in this, should never be begging for justice. Never, never. And Pope Francis has done so much. But if you read, I'm lucky to be in the Commission for the Protection of Minors, and we came out with a document that was unprecedented last week, because it's horrific to see around the world bishops, archbishops that cover up cardinals, priests that say, oh no, this doesn't happen, or that was minor, or in some African bishops, oh, that doesn't happen here, that's a Northern Hemisphere issue. No. It happens everywhere. And we need to be vigilant, and we need to attack it like it's the devil coming in front of you. And survivors are tired of having to beg for justice all over the world, or when they kindly, quote unquote, acknowledge you or take your case, it's dealt with in the most opaque and dark circumstances that nobody knows. People have died waiting for justice. Friends of mine have committed suicide waiting for justice. That's not right. And so it's really important. And I thank you for having something like this where you care. You're going to go out in the world and meet survivors and help them and deal with them and understand them a bit better. And that's why we do this. When I met Pope Francis and became really good friends, he invited me to spend a week with him 5 years ago in Santa Marta. And something clicked, because I went with 2 other friends and they stayed there for 2 days, same as I. But for me, it was like, I always tell him, this was the episode of Lazarus. I was dead. I was in that grave, and I had lost all hope. And then you came, Pope Francis, and said, come out of there. And he said, yeah, because you're a resurrected man now. I'm like, well, I hope so, but that's what he has been for me. I've seen him cry with pain, with the suffering of so many survivors that I've brought to him or that he has told me. And so I am so grateful to him, and so grateful for the Holy Spirit to have put a pope that really cares about this. And many ask me, why are you Catholic? Why do you still remain Catholic? Why do you go to Mass on Sundays? Why do you, I mean, you probably have Stockholm Syndrome, I've been told, or some survivors are angry that I'm working in the church and that I've stayed Catholic. And I understand, and it makes me sad, but I've learned to understand that everybody can have their opinions. But for me, being Catholic, having the Lord in my life, and especially the figure of Mary beside me every day, has been a saving grace for me. People ask me, well, where were they when the priest was abusing you? I'm like, you know what? It took me a while to think where they were, because I was like, yeah, where were they? But I feel that they were right beside me, crying maybe for the horror that was happening to me, and at the same time, I tried to commit suicide, but some hand stopped me from doing that, and I believe it was them, and for me, that has been really important. So everybody has their story. I'm not saying every survivor needs to reconcile, because someone said, Sam said it very well, reconciliation, reparation, not the same, but in my case, I feel this calling that I want to help this situation or this horror, this crime, from inside, and maybe bring some reconciliation and some understanding to a church that has gone array in many ways in that aspect. And that's what I feel the Lord and Mary have done in my journey, and I'm very, very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan Carlos. It is so important that your voice is heard here today, but not only heard here, but on the Pontifical Commission and ultimately with our Holy Father. So thank you for all of your words here today. Before I begin, I do want to say that I've been privileged to speak with several people here in this room who have been impacted by clergy abuse. My name is Mike Hoffman. I am a survivor of clergy sexual abuse. I first came forward to tell my story to officials of the Archdiocese of Chicago in 2006. Since that time, I've been the beneficiary of these restorative justice practices that you're talking about here today. I'm grateful to Father Dan Griffith and the entire planning committee. There's so many people who are here who worked on this planning, for inviting and being open to the voices of clergy abuse survivors and taking their voices to heart in the planning of this session and the entire conference. Thank you, Father Dan. By way of a real brief introduction, I am 58 years old. I am married to my wife, Kathy, for 29 years, and we have two beautiful adult children, Colleen and Michael. We are parishioners at St. Mary of the Woods Parish in the city of Chicago. We've raised our children Catholic, and we've sent our kids to Catholic schools. And given the sexual abuse imposed upon me when I was a little boy by our Catholic priest, you may not understand my decisions. My primary act of recovery was telling my wife my story of childhood sexual abuse back in 2006. Up to that point, I had never told her or anyone my story about how I had been abused. And I finally had the courage to speak about it when I was in my 40s. We had been married over 12 years at that time. I was anxious to tell my wife because I didn't want to introduce what I believe is a sick and a depraved story like that into my marriage. Kathy responded to me with compassion and love and understanding. To be able to share my story, which I had held secret for over 30 years, and still feel safe and loved, is a very profound experience. Feeling believed, heard, and respected by my wife has been critical to my healing process. I became the beneficiary of restorative justice soon after that. Since we are active parishioners, I felt that I should tell my pastor at the time, Father Greg Sakowitz. Back then and now still to this day, Father Greg and I have a great relationship. Regardless of that, I was still very anxious to tell him. I hope you can understand how it might be difficult to tell your Catholic priest that you were sexually abused by a priest when you were a little boy. I felt that Father Greg might be thinking that I was questioning his good ministry or his good character, and obviously I was not doing that. Father Greg listened to me, and he heard me, and he heard the depth of my sadness and my sorrow. He believed me, and he treated me with real empathy and compassion. Restorative justice begins when the victim is believed. We continued to talk, and because that conversation was so good and went so well, with Father Greg's encouragement, I soon felt comfortable enough to reach out to the Archdiocese of Chicago, and I began the independent review board process. During this time, I was able to tell my story to officials of the Archdiocese of Chicago who responded to me with kindness, decency, and compassion, not confrontation. There was justice in that. In short, they believed me, and with that belief in hand, I was able to begin a therapeutic process of healing, which I support all survivors getting the mental health services that they require. An important part of my healing process was individual counseling for 2.5 years and support group with other abuse survivors for an additional 1.5 years. Another very important aspect of my healing process was a meeting with Francis Cardinal George, the Archbishop of Chicago at the time. Cardinal George listened to me. He heard me, and he believed me, and he treated me with respect. Since my abuser was such a dear friend to my parents, I brought photographs of my abuser at many of our family functions, and I shared those photographs with Cardinal George. We talked about my family, my parents, my siblings. The Cardinal apologized to me for the abuse imposed upon me when I was a little boy. I accepted the Cardinal's apology. I appreciated our time together. Because of that time he spent with me and because our conversation was so good, I feel comfortable continuing to practice my faith. I hold that experience up, that personal experience up, as a model of restorative justice. I'm so grateful to each of our panelists who have placed the voices of survivors at the heart of their work and ongoing ministry. You know, Pope Francis has asked all of the bishops of the world to be open to and listening and taking to heart voices of survivors. Therefore, our entire church is what he's asking. So I want to say thank you to you for being open to and taking to heart at least the voices of 2 survivors here, and there are others that are impacted by survivors in this room. Thank you. So now with that, the theme of our discussion that we're about to have is just that, listening to the voices of survivors. And I want to start with my friend Barbara. I want you to know this. I want to read this to you. She's had such a career dedicated to the voices of survivors and healing the wounds caused by clergy abuse. Barbara, don't blush. As director of the outreach effort to survivors impacted families in the Archdiocese of Boston, you have assisted with over 100 meetings between survivors and Cardinal O'Malley. I can personally tell you that those are important meetings. You additionally coordinated the planning of the meeting between 5 survivors from the Archdiocese of Boston with Pope Benedict in Washington, D.C. in April of 2008. Additionally, you were also part of Cardinal O'Malley's apostolic visitation team to the Archdiocese of Dublin in 2010-2011, facilitating 60 meetings with survivors and their families. This is critical work. Can you, Barbara, share a bit about the encounter with Pope Benedict and your perspective about the challenges that we have in this current moment? Thank you.
Well, I am deeply humbled to follow you, Mike, and Juan Carlos, who I have not met until today. It is, I don't even have word for what it means to be with all of you today after 20 years of my own work with this. I am so deeply grateful to be with all of you here at St. Thomas University Law School, as well as for those who are joining virtually. I'm a bit of a storyteller, and I realize that as a panelist, that will not lend itself very well to the important dialogue of the panel and with all of you. So I have prepared a few brief thoughts so I don't wander too much. As you know, the first of the Boston Globe Spotlight stories was published on the Feast of the Epiphany, Sunday, January 6, 2002. For those of us in Boston, that Feast of the Epiphany was one like no other, and continues to be. The truth-telling of survivors, aided by journalists and so many others, have been a brave gift, often at great cost, pointing the way to justice. The abuse, betrayal, silencing, and shame perpetrated on children and vulnerable adults is now well documented, not only in the United States, but throughout the world. Yet the truth of the matter is that the resistance to the necessary institutional changes to ensure justice are in many places not only glacial, they're frozen. A few weeks ago, the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors published a remarkable statement. If you have not read it, I encourage you to read it. I've heard a lot of statements over the last 20 years. This statement was something. I am so pleased to meet Juan Carlos for the first time at this meeting and to be able to thank him and all who joined him on the PCPM in preparing this statement. One clarion sentence struck me like a lightning bolt, and Juan Carlos used it several times in his exhortation. No one should have to beg for justice in the church. I'll repeat it. No one should have to beg for justice in the church. I have, throughout these past 20 years, been incredibly blessed to be an eyewitness to extraordinary moments of encounter with survivors. Some such meetings are as if entering into the gospel scene of the raising of Lazarus. Now, I didn't know that Juan Carlos was going to reference that scene. Martha and Mary running to Jesus, grief-stricken over the death of their brother Lazarus. Jesus' anguished weeping as he commands the stone of the tomb to be rolled back. Lazarus emerging from the tomb to the utter amazement of the crowd. And Lazarus, at Jesus' direction, being aided by women and men, unbinding him. In 2008, at the meeting with Pope Benedict in Washington, D.C., with 5 survivors from Boston, just such a scene exploded before my eyes. Cardinal O'Malley not only introduced 2 women and 3 men abuse survivors to Pope Benedict, but he also presented a beautifully handcrafted book containing the names of 1,476 survivors from the Archdiocese of Boston. Over 50 of the names were marked by a small gold cross, signifying a tragic death. I have brought with me today a copy of this book of names. It's here with us between Regina and I would love you to be able to see the book later. It's precious indeed. I sat in the back pew of the Nunciature Chapel beside Archbishop Sambi, who was the nuncio serving in the United States at the time. Tears were streaming down his face. The gift of grace was palpable. In this extraordinary moment of encounter, it was the survivors who were rolling back the stone for the unbinding of the gathered clergy, bishops, and yes, Pope Benedict, to be freed, to see, to hear, and to believe the terrible truth of the grievous abuse perpetrated by members of the clergy. With all the hope of that moment, and so many others like it over the years, I am also witness to the ongoing institutional harm and moral injury that seems unyielding, even with the weeping of Jesus resounding in our hearts. In 2008, one of the names in the book presented to Pope Benedict was the name of a man who I met in 2002. I will call him Bill. I spoke with him several nights ago to ask his permission to share a bit of his story. He would have liked actually to have been with us, but his calendar did not allow it, so he's very much present with him, and I'm very grateful to him and for his willingness to share his story with us. It was not until 2021, almost 20 years after his initial complaint and 9 years sitting on appeal at the Vatican, that Bill's case was finally adjudicated by the CDF with a finding of guilt and a penalty of prayer and penance. The offending priest, then well past 90 years old, died a few months later. These are Bill's words now. Leaving a victim like me in limbo has profound effects. It has robbed me of peace all these years and seriously impacted my personal relationships and in view of the church that seems to care more about its reputation than a single person like me. It burned me incredibly deeply all this time that he has been able to deny his actions while I have had to wrestle with all that his abuse did to me. That is not justice, and it is not Christian in my humble view. The words at Mass, "May the peace of the Lord be with you," ring hollow to me when the church has failed to take a step that would actually help to bring peace to me and many others who have been abused. I am grateful that he was finally found guilty, but his insignificant punishment is an affront to me and to all those he abused. Over the course of the almost 20 years awaiting the conclusion of the case, Bill made frequent inquiries about the reason for the delay and for any information at all. He was met with deafening silence. Bill calls it ghosting, leaving the survivors unheard and unacknowledged. For survivors who as children and teenagers were silenced by threats and shaming by the perpetrator, letters and calls that go unanswered are an especially cruel form of institutional silencing and abandonment by the church. No one should have to beg for justice. The promises of Vos Estis Lux Mundi in 2019. You are the light of the world. What hope, right? They resent this, you, Vos Estis Lux Mundi, you are the light of the world. In practice, it resembles more of a flickering 10-watt bulb than the penetrating light of Christ that leaves nothing hidden in the shadows. Some who submit Vos Estis reports are often left shut out and unacknowledged, or if acknowledged, are left waiting months, rolling into years, for action to be taken, and like Bill, waiting in silence. Just last week, leading a class via Zoom 12 time zones away, the central question of the participants was how to break through the resistance of their bishops and clergy to implement core guidelines for child safeguarding and outreach to survivors. Words matter. Words such as zero tolerance, pledges to protect children and vulnerable adults, promises to listen and to accompany, words of apology, ache our hearts when they are only words. Time matters also, and we endure a lack of resolve and urgency to do the right thing for the right thing's sake. We are a synodal gathering here in Minneapolis over these next few days, united with the historic synod on synodality underway at the Vatican. We are gathered as lay women and men, religious, clergy, and bishops seeking the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. The fact that Mike and Juan Carlos are leading this session, and the fact that this panel is sponsored by the Archdiocese of St. Paul, Minneapolis, with Archbishop Hebda joined with us, gives us hope and strength. The testimonies and witness of abuse survivors have a claim on all of us to dig deep into the heart of Christian discipleship and to stand in solidarity toward an enduring culture of restorative justice that is transparent, that is accountable, that is truthful, and foundational for healing and peace.
Barbara, thank you. Regina, I'm going to turn to you now. In your experience, Regina, what do people in the church need to know about ministering to those who have experienced trauma?
I think it's important that we define trauma first, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. And whenever somebody has a traumatic response, it's an emotional response to some type of traumatic event. So it can be anything from abuse, like we're talking about today, to an accident, to natural disaster, an act of racism. And for every person, it's a little bit different. Just because you experience the traumatic event doesn't mean that you will now all of a sudden have these symptoms of trauma. I think it's also important to note that somebody doesn't have to experience the event themselves to experience those symptoms. They can be a witness to something traumatic, or they can be exposed to traumatic information. So when you think about the people you're ministering to, the person who is very demanding, the person who calls a lot, needs a lot of your time, maybe we're not always as eager to get up and reach out. We might not feel like speaking to someone. And we encounter, as you know, we encounter people on all different parts of their healing journey, like Juan Carlos so beautifully mentioned before. And so being mindful of how important and invaluable your role is when it comes to ministry, whatever that is, being able to receive someone, not necessarily their story, but to receive them as a person of who they are. And if they're coming to you with negativity, with flashbacks, with anger outbursts, to be in that person of Christ, to be able to receive them again as they are, because we're told to come as we are. And how invaluable your role is in that process of healing and journey to recognize, because when we can look through the lens of trauma, it all of a sudden gives clarity to how we respond to someone and what's appropriate versus, oh my gosh, this person is so annoying, I can't, please, can you handle them? And so I think about the social supports as well. We as therapists, we're trained to sort of ask. So when someone comes to me, one of the first things I want to know about is who's in their community, who's their network. And if that feels like it's lacking in some way, that's going to be one of my priorities, is making sure you're connected with those social supports, whether that's through your parish or some other type of community involvement. And so your role is truly invaluable and plays a crucial step in the process of somebody's healing, to be able to come around and provide that social support and context. I never want you to underestimate that role and that ability to be supportive. When I think about some of the stories that I've heard of people sharing part of their stories when they get to that point, being told, oh, we forgive you, after somebody has shared an experience of abuse, and that's their response. And you can imagine how hurtful that would be to someone, right? And so again, when you're the recipient of a story or even the recipient of a symptom and you have no idea what's going on, being mindful of how powerful it is to receive that, to honor that person's dignity regardless of how hurtful it could be even to you, and to remember that you're that representation of Christ. And that's an opportunity for healing and growth each time.
Thank you, Regina. Archbishop Hebda, I want to turn to you. You know, my encounter with my Archbishop in Chicago was very meaningful to me. Even all these years later, you make yourself available to survivors weekly. I have two quick questions. How does that experience to you? And also, how does that impact you personally?
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, just allow me to make a little bit of a confession before we start and address those questions. And that's that I certainly have made that a priority and offered to always give any survivors time on Fridays or any other time that would be convenient for them. But I have to tell you that I've had very few survivors who have reached out to me recently. So I missed that experience greatly. You've heard about two wonderful shepherds today with Cardinal George and Cardinal O'Malley, and then certainly Pope Francis and Pope Benedict as well. And they're men who have certainly held the bar very high for bishops, and what are the possibilities for learning about how it is that we should shepherd, most especially in our conversations with survivors. I can tell you that there are plenty of survivors in this archdiocese who would say they haven't felt that they've been heard sufficiently by me or by my staff. That's part of life, but we're certainly striving to be able to do that. So as I was trying to figure out how it was that when I listened to the panel this morning and then listened to the presentations of my colleagues on the panel today, I wonder how I merited being here. And then I heard that I was sponsoring the event, and it all made perfect sense. But it's a humbling experience to be here because I'm not an academic, nor am I an expert, but I have been somebody who's been personally changed by the experiences that I've had, by the opportunities that I've had to listen to survivors, and by their willingness to share with me their stories and their hopes. Before Juan Carlos went up, he said, "Pray for me," that as he made his brilliant exhortation. And I always think, anytime that a survivor asks me to pray, what did I do to deserve that? When there's somebody that's been betrayed in some ways by somebody who wears the same black that I do, how is it that they can trust me or to share with me in that way? And that's really helped me to think about the work that's before me and how it is that I can do that in a better way. And I think that my experiences with survivors in particular has helped me in other areas of ministry as well. This morning we heard about questions of racial justice or the boarding school issue, which is something very real here in this archdiocese. And certainly there's what I've learned, I think, from listening to survivors of sexual abuse reminds me that I need to be listening in those areas as well, and to do that with that a better heart and a better ear. In some ways, though, it seems to me that survivors of sexual abuse, especially by clergy, are more difficult than even those other areas, because it's even harder for them to be recognized as being in a group. It's not a question of DNA, or it's not a question of membership. They are sometimes, they're all over, as Juan Carlos was explaining. People have many different perceptions. And so as I sit and listen to them, I've been with some people who are so alienated from the church and rightfully angry. And I've also had the opportunity to listen to people who are sitting next to us in our pews, very unknown people who have been hurt in some way by the scourge of abuse in our church. Even some of our real leaders in the church have been are survivors as well, and we don't even know about that. So it's harder to see them as a group. Sometimes they speak out publicly about abuse. Sometimes it's something that they hold in their hearts for a long time. there was a common theme in this morning's presentations, was the need for those who have been harmed to be the ones who lead and shape conversations. And Mike, that's what I've been trying to do for sure. It's certainly true in those privileged encounters that I've had with survivors. The initial temptation for me, I think, as a clergy person, is to want to fix the situation or to do something that would help. And ultimately, I've come to appreciate all the more that what is being asked for is just listening. And we heard that a little bit as Mike spoke about his encounter with Cardinal George as well. But it is, as we heard this morning, it's a listening with an openness to change. We have to really be open to change our ideas, to change our hearts. And I am blessed here in this archdiocese to have colleagues that have already raised that bar pretty high. I have great staff. There are great resources in this community. I think about Father Dan or Janine Geske, who's helped so much in this archdiocese and who have really modeled for me what it means to be listening with that kind of attentive heart and ear. You mentioned that I had indeed announced that I would hold Fridays open for conversations. Since COVID, there really haven't been people that have been responded, and I miss those conversations that kept before my eyes the truth of abuse and the urgency of addressing questions of prevention and questions of healing. I was really grateful in the statement that was referenced earlier from the Pontifical Commission that it was calling the Synod to keep this before their eyes. I think it's important for all of us, and that's what was one of the blessings early on in my time here, is to have so many survivors who would come and share their stories with me, because there was an urgency there that was there. There was a priority that was there, and I need that. I made one terrible mistake, and that's I hired a brilliant outreach coordinator, Paula Kampfer. Because now, instead of coming to talk to me, everybody wants to talk to Paula. And she does it with such a wonderful pastoral heart. One of the things that she's mastered too is how it is that even in the midst of COVID, that we would be able to have outreach online. And I've had the privilege really of participating in some of those events. And I was amazed, and certainly as the circle broadens, when we're able to do things online, it's not just people from the Twin Cities, but people from across the country and beyond. But there are always those follow-up questions. Every time I've participated in one of those, just as a listener, there have been people who have called to talk about some issue. And you have, even if they weren't willing to share online, they certainly want to speak to somebody, and I feel so blessed by that for sure. Paula helped me. We did in preparation for the synod that the Synod on Synodality that we've been speaking about. Each bishop was asked to coordinate some listening sessions to prepare for that. And Paula helped me to do one just with people who are survivors of abuse by clergy. And boy, it was a powerful experience that people were willing to share so much. And we were able then to send the fruits of that conversation to the USCCB and then ultimately to Rome. But it was an important contribution that came forward. But what I've really learned from listening to survivors is that their primary concern is that this issue of abuse wouldn't occur in the future. I apologize that I'm talking a lot, but I get passionate about this when I think about how wonderful it is that in the midst of all of the harms, that the number one concern is always for others. How is it that we're able to prevent this in the future? Everyone, to a person, even when there's great anger, they've all been willing to help. So whether it would be to talk to our seminarians so that this doesn't happen in the future, whether it would be to speak with our priests, they've always been willing to help. I've been really blessed. I have a little kitchen cabinet of survivors who have advised me for these last few years on what are the steps that we should be taking to do better. And I even though there are times when they would push me to do even more, I've really valued their input, and it's made, I think, a huge difference in my ministry. But certainly coming to see that, boy, this is what it's a privilege to be able to sit in the seat of Archbishop here, that these people who have been impacted so negatively by the church are willing to be our allies as we strive to bring the church out of the tomb that you were talking about, and to be, or the graphic that we saw early with those people who I can't see. How is it that we bring the church to a place where we're able to really see what it is that makes us and is going to help us to be that church that Christ wants us to be? So I can't imagine what my ministry would be like if I didn't have people that were willing to speak with me, that were willing to trust me enough to share those stories. So I'm very grateful, Mike. Sorry for a long answer to a short question.
Thank you, Archbishop Hebda. I'm so glad you have that kitchen cabinet of survivors. That's important to keep that. Juan Carlos, I've got 2 questions for you. It won't be a big exhortation. Knowing the impact that my local bishop had on me, and knowing the impact that survivors sitting with Archbishop Hebda had on them, in Chile, was there ever any bishop that ever offered to meet with you?
Unfortunately, no. I mean, they did eventually when they were forced to. I didn't have that luxury. In fact, we were considered the enemy. We were considered that we wanted money, because the 3 main, this had never happened in Chile and in South America, well, some countries in South America. And so to challenge, the church, the Catholic Church, was unheard of because of all the power, because of all the importance, and how they, there's deep clericalism. And I hear Pope Francis when he calls clericalism the cancer of in the church. It's a cancer. And so, no, they never did. When they did talk to us, they were actually fired by Pope Francis. So the whole bishops' conference. So like 8 never came back, or 9, and then the others are there still with some conditions. But yeah, no.
Thank you. Also, again, like Barbara had mentioned, this past week or 10 days or so ago, a press release came out from the Pontifical Commission. I know you had a hand in that. Can you add any, related to the tone, the exhortation to begin to get it right? Can you speak about that?
Yeah. One of the things that for me was really important when Pope Francis appointed me in the commission was the little relevance that the commission had among survivors. For many things, because it's institutional, because of this. I lost friends because I joined, and that's okay, or I've come to peace with it, I guess. But I'm really grateful to, Pope Francis, obviously, but to Cardinal O'Malley, too. Cardinal O'Malley is a man that, from the outside, you don't think that he wants conflict, and that's fine, because it's part of who we are. But he's a real fighter. And I, for one, have come to know him really well and respect him very, very much. So, it's been very disturbing to me when you get text messages constantly from victims, and I'm not the only one. Many in the commission get texts from victims. My case, nothing happens, and this is happening. And 3 weeks ago we had the meeting, 3 weeks ago, and that statement came out. But it came out because I proposed, I'm tired. I mean, the Rupnik case is, they're blaming Pope Francis. So many things have been mishandled. We have, I've been talking to survivors of the Bishop Bello. Bishop Bello was one of the, in the 70s, one of the, he got the Nobel Prize for the independence of East Timor. But he abused a bunch of kids there. And he got the Nobel Prize. You know, he was sanctioned by he was taken away from East Timor, but he's somewhere in Portugal and now in Africa, helping in a parish. I talked to those survivors. Those are the survivors, not that there's class A or class B, because there's survivors, but there are survivors that have resources or platforms that they can go. There's others that are absolutely invisible, and it breaks your heart. These people in East Timor, they are threatened with death if they talk about their bishop who earned them their independence and who won the Nobel Prize. Well, I'm writing a letter to the Nobel Prize Committee, and I'm getting other people for him to take away his Nobel Prize. And if there's any money left, which I highly doubt because it's probably offshore somewhere, but it should go to the victims. But at least those things, right? And these are people that don't know even what doors to knock, so they knock at and it's profoundly embarrassing to me that the commission didn't do or respond to those things. So it was an opportune time when the consistory was happening, when the synod was happening, to do a statement like no other. And I have to admit that I made it a lot harsher, and Cardinal O'Malley and all that, I understand why some things were softened, but it was still harsh. Cardinal O'Malley has really taken it to heart to do these things and to lead this commission into something a lot more than it has been.
Thank you, Juan Carlos, for doing that. Honestly, thank you. So I've gotten all these cards, and I love the energy. I hope we can get to your questions, because a dialogue is what we're hoping for. I hope we can get there. So I have one, the first question, so I just took it in order. It's to all of us. So where do you look for encouragement and hope in this work? So Barbara, I'm going to turn to you.
Oh, without a doubt. To Juan Carlos, to you, Mike, Jim is here, to survivors. They are really, in your leadership at this moment, and what you just described, was only a survivor could do, Juan Carlos. And I thank you for your yes to being on the commission, even with how much it put you maybe in a spotlight that you didn't want to, and hurt you in some ways. But it's truly the survivors, and we're just really beginning to have the conversation about vulnerable adults and abuse there with women. The Rupnick case has really highlighted. I mean, it was so painful when this latest incident arose that we hear the women who have suffered mostly in silence for decades, and then to have this whole thing come up, and like with Bill, letters that go unresponded to. So the survivors, that they continue to write letters, to persevere, it is because they love Jesus and they love the church in a way that we can't even begin to get our arms around. So I am just every day inspired.
Yeah, I would say the Lord gives me a lot of hope. You all here, this conference, and survivors, of course. I think the transformative growth process after an experience like abuse is truly phenomenal to witness. And I think so many people are so much stronger and courageous than anyone, truly, to have to think about, just getting ready for work in the morning and doing your routines. And, some people have difficulty just getting out of bed, again, depending on what phase of the journey you're in. And so when I think about who is really strong, what does that say about me? Just getting ready and brushing my teeth without thinking about it, versus somebody who has to actually kind of come in armed and ready and prepared as I go approach my parish or approach something else. And so that gives me so much hope about the true transformation that the Lord does in his death and resurrection, and the grace that he gives to us, and his ability to heal everything.
Thank you. Thank you. Juan Carlos, what gives you
Me,
hope?
quick, it's these things, and meeting people like Archbishop Hebda, Father Dan, Chris Ann, you, Regina, might be able to analyze it in a better way about me, but a little pill that I take occasionally when I have panic attacks, and that. Thank you, Lord, for creating that. I work for a lithium company, so it's even I get them for free. But in all seriousness, that other survivors here, one of the things that encourages me when I speak in these places is, in many times survivors get this answer, or priests, and not you, Archbishop, of course, but I've been with panels that say, well, in the 80s, 90s, we didn't have the knowledge on how to deal with these things. I'm like, it drives me crazy, because it's like raping a child has been wrong before Christ. And I said this in Georgetown, and I see John Carr laughing, but raping a child has been wrong before Christ, after Christ, in the Middle Ages, now, and it will always be wrong. So when a bishop or someone in leadership in the church tells me, yeah, we didn't know how to deal with it. No, what are you doing as a bishop? Just leave better. It's people like these that encourage me to keep fighting.
Archbishop Hebda?
I would say I would take Barbara's response at the beginning, that in terms of the way in which survivors have been willing to help, but even more broadly than just the survivor community, just our lay faithful. I can tell you that, as people step forward to be on review boards, but really to invest time and, from all different walks of life, people who are willing to be, almswood people for working with survivors, people who are like you are studying this, and that are holding bishops accountable. I think that makes a huge difference. That even as I've been here today, heard a lot of wonderful things, but I've also heard some jabs as well, right? But it keeps before my eyes the importance of moving forward. So that gives me hope. Your complaints give me hope.
Thank you all. I do have a volunteer here. She's lifting up the card. So we have 10 minutes left. So we're going to pick a few more questions. Mike and Juan Carlos spoke powerfully about the healing they have experienced through being believed and trusted with compassion by church leaders. However, many abuse survivors making reports today do not have that experience and are re-traumatized by their treatment by church leaders. This is an excellent question. What does restorative justice and healing look like for those survivors who are experiencing ongoing harm at the hands of church leaders today? I hate to start with you, Barbara.
Wow. It just hurts so much even to hear the question, right? I would encourage those survivors and those families as well that continue to be hurt. There are places of hope and of listening and of welcome and of care, and to seek those out, but also there needs to be accountability for when that harm is done. And I'm not sure exactly what the mechanism is, if indeed someone goes to someone responsible in a diocese or religious order and are hurt again. There needs to be a pathway to make that known to others. That needs to stop. That needs to be fixed. So whether it's with the National Review Board or other entities that need to make this a priority, we 20 years after Spotlight, should not be hearing that question. And I'm looking at Sarah. I don't know if it was your question, Sarah. Sorry to out you on it, but I know Sarah has been standing in the breach and Awake Milwaukee has been an extraordinary moment in this process, so that people like that do have a place of warm and caring, listening and believing, but it shouldn't be. That's all I can say. Shannon?
I think there's, again, a role for laity in this as well, to be willing to speak up when we see or notice something. I'm thinking about a situation in my own diocese where there were people concerned about, this was not clergy related, but somebody who had a position of authority in the diocese, and there was questions about harassment of this person to other individuals, and the way it was handled was a very traditional, like, oh, we're looking into this and we'll move on, and kind of, again, passing by the concern. And there was somebody, a few of the employees actually kind of pushed back a little bit and asked, well, what are the appropriate channels? If this method of reporting is not working, is there a way to check and balance this and make sure that if somebody were to have a concern, how do we make sure that this is legitimized, investigated, and pursued? So I think we can pursue those opportunities when we have questions, to take those steps to actually ask them and use our voice when it's appropriate and necessary. It's usually always appropriate. So.
That's right. Thank you, Regina. Juan Carlos?
I think the experts have said it beautifully, so we can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Archbishop Hebda?
I would just say we have to try to do something structurally as well. So one of the things that's worked well in the Archdiocese is that we've been served by an ombudsperson who holds us accountable, so that's available for somebody that feels that they haven't been heard. So we have our Julie Craven is doing that now, and you've already come to experience her expertise. Victoria Johnson's in the room as well. She did that after her husband Tom did that. But it's one of those ways in which we're able, even structurally, to make sure that there's somebody to hear if they don't feel that I'm doing my job well, or that somebody on my staff, that there's an outside person that's going to support them and to walk with them in that situation. Barbara mentioned Vos Estis, and that I think also has that reporting system that was set up by the USCCB, has some promise there as well. Not as well developed as something I think locally, but it at least would hold a bishop or his staff accountable as well.
Thank you, Archbishop Hebda. We have one more question, and believe me, there's about a dozen additional questions, and so I'm available to answer questions off site or off the stage. I'm sure Juan Carlos will make himself available as well if you'd like. Here's a final question. In Monique Maddox's response this morning, she named self-sufficiency as the #1 currency in restorative justice in her context. What do you think that resource or currency is for survivors, for clergy sexual abuse victim survivors? Trust, transparency, a sense of safety? How do we get there and provide that? I'd like to take a stab at this one individually. From my experience, it's helpful to ask the survivors what they need for their own healing. And oftentimes, the narrative is slightly changed. Church wants to provide this, and now you're healed. Church wants to provide that, and now you're healed. Let's ask the survivors. The survivors are strong enough and resilient enough to know what they need for their own healing. Barbara, I'll turn it over to you.
You nailed it. Mike. I mean, that's really, because every survivor's journey and story is their story. We didn't know Juan Carlos's story in the fullness of which he was willing to share it with us today, and I'm sure there are parts of the story that Juan Carlos may never tell anyone, or Mike. But we need to be willing to be creative and to be stretched beyond what we think is the right answer to that it is always must come from the deep listening to survivors and to their families as to what they need to heal.
Thank you, Barbara. Regina?
I think that's perfect, yeah. I wouldn't add any more to that.
Juan Carlos?
I think I listened to you, Monique, this morning, and I thought about this applied to survivors, and of course I agree with what all of you say. For me also it's important because it's really tragic because survivors are hurt. Of course, they're the receivers of the crime, but families and friends even are tremendously hurt. So we have to have some way also of helping the survivors, listening to the survivors, listening to who has been hurt around their surroundings. Or my mom is a most wonderful woman. I love her to death, and she was sometimes a bit of a fanatic in my mind, and she almost lost her faith with all this, and for her it was like, where was I when this man did this to you, unfortunately, for 8 years? That's another embarrassing thing, 8 years. Where was I? And she's been deeply hurt by that, and sometimes blames herself. Now we've, it's been a long time, and she's like, please don't go on other panels or talk about me. But I wrote a book where I talk about her, and so, but we have to look after families also, and people that the survivor is not the only one hurt in this story.
Thank you. Archbishop?
I would say on a panel discussion that's about the voices of survivors, that we go with what you said and with what Juan Carlos said.
Okay,
Thank you
good.
for your
Good.
answers.
Thank you. This is concluded now, and I think Caitlin has a few words to share. Thank you.
Well, my first words are ones of gratitude. Thank you. Thank you, Juan Carlos. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Regina. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Archbishop Hebda. Just as we began this panel in silence, I'll invite us to take a moment in silence again to honor all that we have heard and lift up each one of you in prayer, along with every survivor of sexual abuse in the church, named and unnamed. Amen. If you're like me, there's been a lot to take in today. And it's heartening to remember that the Holy Spirit is with us. We invite you to bring the stirrings of your heart and spirit into the restorative practice of circle process this evening. Earlier today, you hopefully received a notification inviting you to fill out a poll on the conference app, letting us know if you plan to attend one of these circles. Virtual folks, there will be one available for you as well. Your response is so helpful to our circle keepers in their planning and preparation. So if you haven't responded yet, I give you permission now to take out your phone, On the home screen, scroll to additional resources and click on the poll button. There you will be able to answer one question, letting us know about your plans to attend. If you are not on the app, please visit Lucy at the registration table and let her know that you plan to be there. Whether this is your first time or 400th time in Circle, you are welcome. And if you're uncertain, just come anyway. Speaking of circles and talking pieces, we are so grateful that I think some of you have found comfort in the crosses in the centerpieces of our table. We hope that others may also continue to find comfort in them. So if you happen to have one with you, if you wouldn't mind returning it to the centerpiece at the end of today, because we have plans for them to be available as talking pieces as part of our synodal process tomorrow. Now, as we break, we have another fantastic set of breakout sessions. And you can find the room numbers in the Whova app, in the conference app, as well as in your program insert. Please be sure to say hello to our exhibitors on your way. And in case you haven't noticed already, there is one table that is simply available for the sharing of resources. So please do spend time there and feel free to add your own. And that is all I have for now. We will see you back here in the atrium at 4:15. Thank you.